Well, good morning, everybody. This is David coming to you from the land of enchantment. I've been thinking all week about who owns the moon. When you think about, any land that's around, uh, you know, at least in the United States, I don't think there's any land that's not owned by somebody. And so I've been wondering, you know, who owns the moon? But first, this week's joke. So, what do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? What do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? This one's easy. So, is it silly to ask who owns the moon? Uh, the last time a human society discovered large tracts of land that had previously been accessible to them, the result was a chaotic flag planting race between England, Spain, France, and anybody else with boats and a thirst for spices. Some significant problems developed out of how this situation was handled, not the least of which was that there were already people on these lands, but there was also mass chaos and war as countries raced to claim lands and resources. And you can look that up on Alternative Daily. This, this is, I'm sure this was talking about uh, the United States or the Americas as people came to uh, explore the New World. The United States is the only country to have ever put people on the moon. However, Russia, Japan, China, the European Space Agency, and even India have all made visits to the moon via probes. Uh, Mexico has started a space program called AEM in 2010 and is hoping to send a probe to the moon and have received special funding from NASA to do that. So each one of these countries have a vested interest in the moon. The current interest in colonization and mining makes that more important. What I mean by that is uh, you hear on the news all the time about sending permanent colonies on the moon, permanent mining. They want to mine helium-3 or hydrogen-3, helium-3, uh, and water, uh, and regolith, which is a building material. So there's a lot of interest in the moon right at this point. So are there private companies wanting to go to the moon? As of 2010, NASA's working on an Orion spacecraft. SpaceX, we hear a lot about. Uh, Tesla, uh, Orbital Sciences is another company. Blue Origin, Bigelow Aerospace, Space Dev or Sierra Nevada Corporation, Virgin Galactic, and Astrobiotic Technology. And if you go to their website, it says it costs $1.2 million per kilo to send something to the moon. You can reserve now. Um, They have a $79.5 million contract from NASA. Um, while I'm thinking about it, this picture I have showing here, Spaceport America, is 8,000 acres in New Mexico, USA. That happens to be very close to my home. Uh, they're getting ready. They're very heavily invested in Virgin Galactic. So as soon as Virgin Galactic gets ready to launch, they will be doing things. Are there current agreements, maybe what we would call treaties? In the year after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the United Nations General Assembly created an ad hoc committee on the peaceful uses of outer space, which was called COPUOS. As of mid-2016, that outer space treaty has 77 members, including major spacefaring nations such as the United States, Russia, Japan, China, Canada, Brazil, Australia, and the member states of the European Space Agency. So it's called the Outer Space Treaty. Here are some of the major points of that treaty. Space is free for all nations to explore, and sovereign claims cannot be made. Space activities must be for the benefit of all nations and humans. So basically, nobody owns the moon. Nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction are not allowed in Earth orbit, on celestial bodies, or in outer space locations. In other words, peace is the only acceptable use of outer space locations. Individual nations, states, are responsible for any damage that their space objects cause. Individual nations are also responsible for all government and non-government activities conducted by their citizens. These states must also avoid harmful contamination due to space activities. So if a piece of a satellite falls through your roof, somebody is responsible to pay for that. Here are some other treaties. There are 4. The Rescue Agreement, which means the signers should give assistance to astronauts in space, or if they are stranded or whatever. The Liability Convention, if a space object causes damage, the launching state shall be liable. The Registration Convention is a way to keep track of all objects launched into space. In this day and age of information, we're the age of information. It's our job to keep track of everything. The Moon Agreement is more detail on the space treaty. However, only 16 nations have signed it. So it's a process in work, I guess. Here's an interesting thing. President Obama signed the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Well, that's a mouthful. H.R. 2262 into law. This law recognizes the right of U.S. citizens to own asteroid resources they obtain and encourages the commercial exploration and utilization of resources from asteroids. So lots of these countries may want to land on some kind of asteroid and mine it for all the platinum and diamonds that exist there. Boy, I'd like to see an asteroid made of solid diamond. Another owner, so to speak, this guy is named Dennis Hope. You can look him up on the internet. He'll tell you he's the richest man on Earth. In fact, he'll say he's the richest man in the solar system. Why? Because as far as he's concerned, he owns most of the solar system. Hope wrote a letter to the United Nations saying that the moon was his, and he asked the group to come up with a legal reason why an individual could not claim ownership of the moon. He never heard back. This sounded to me like Mark Sargent's famous talk to the International Flat Earth Convention. Since then, since he sent this letter, he has sold 611 million acres of land on the moon. He is the president of the galactic government. Sounds like Star Wars. A democratic republic that represents landowners on the moon and some of his other properties. He has claimed Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter's moon, Io, and Pluto while he was at it. If you got the money, by the way, you can buy the whole planet of Pluto, or I guess it's dwarf planet of Pluto, for $250,000. Believe it or not, he's said to be worth $91 million just by selling land on the moon. So go see him if you want to buy some land. There are many major debates: access to space, weapons in space, space debris, mining rights, boundary disputes and property rights, geosynchronous satellite slots. This geosynchronous orbit is limited in how many satellites can be there. International cooperation. So there's an awful lot of debate over what's going on now in space. So there are many questions left. For one, we can also go to who owns Mars. There are no humans that have been there, but they're already talking about who owns Mars, or not who owns Mars, but they're already talking about landing colony or setting up colonies on Mars. So then, as I was perusing this, thinking about this all week, I started thinking of one very important question. What about the flat earthers? They don't even believe that Mars and the moon are real, and it seems to me they're going to be left in the cold here when the land rush begins. So just something to think about there. This week's joke, remember, what do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. So this is my